Good.
Hold on. Sorry. Speeding. Wait
I
for
think
the
you're.
slight. That was terrible, but it works.
Good morning and welcome back to the Family Life Podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode. We have awesome special guests and a really exciting topic. So we're just going to jump right on in. I would love for you guys to introduce yourself, and then this is the Family Life Podcast. So we always talk about our families. So do you want to start? Just share who you are and tell us a little bit about your family.
Sure. Well, my name is Marissa. I am married to Jared, who is actually a pastor here on staff at Palm Valley Church, and we have two daughters, Esme and Cora. A little bit about me and my story as it pertains to our topic today of mental health. I struggled with my mental health from a very young age, even as a child, and as a teenager and young adult, continued to struggle in more serious ways, even after becoming a Christian at the age of 17 and having my life radically changed my senior year of high school. Because of this lifelong struggle, I was deeply interested in psychology, and I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, thinking that maybe after graduation I might want to continue on and become a licensed counselor. But God had other plans, and instead I spent the next 8 years on staff in PVC Kids, working with hundreds of kids and families, all ages and stages. And over the past few years, I would say the last 4 years, God has really brought a lot of healing to my life, a lot of victory over this struggle through lots of different things, through Christian therapy, through being in Celebrate Recovery, which is the ministry that I'm a part of at our Buckeye campus. And lots of lifestyle changes that I made. And over the past year, I've actually been working on, God willingly, starting a mental health ministry of my own.
That's awesome.
So that's my story.
Wonderful. My name is Selena Contreras. My husband is also on staff here at Palm Valley. He supports the young adults. He oversees young adult ministry. I am a school psychologist by profession. I've been in that role for over 10 years now, and I'm also an Arizona licensed psychologist. I have found that the support that I give to students, primarily have worked with students from elementary to high school, more so with middle school students over the years. When I'm working with students, I'm often supporting them with dealing with anxiety and depression, developing healthy coping skills, and speaking into their lives in a positive way to help them to have positive outcomes. In my own life, I found that when I have had difficulties with anxiety and depression, I have reached out to a mental health practitioner myself for help. And those mental health practitioners are telling me the same thing that I'm telling my students. And so all that to say, what we know about mental health and what works, things have been tried and true. And I'm so grateful to be here today to talk about some of those things and share them with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited because the topic of mental health is so vast, it's so large, but it's such a needed conversation for us to share with everybody around it. And so as we open up, I would love to hear, just like in your own words, like how would you define mental health? Like there's this huge net you can cast, but kind of just to rein it in a little bit to help our listeners understand, maybe if they've never heard of it or they're unaware, how would you define it in your own words?
Defining mental health. Well, I know that the middle school students that I work with, they don't like the term mental health, I learned, because to them, they told me, can you call it something different? Because students are going to come talk to you about their mental health. Young people, I've noticed, liken it to mental illness. They see that if you talk about mental health, then that means you're talking about having a mental illness. And so I talk to them about mental health being similar to physical health. We all know that physical health is when our heart is working well, our muscles are working well, so that we are able to do the things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. Same thing with mental health. Our mental health is housed in our brain. It oversees our ability to have social relationships with others, have healthy emotions or healthy expression of emotions, and be able to maintain some control over how we feel. And we have all those things in check so that we can do what we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And so that's how I describe mental health to my students.
Oh, I love that. I think it's so interesting how oftentimes when the topic of mental health comes up in society and conversations, we're not actually talking about mental health, but mental illness, anxiety, depression, other things that affect your brain. And that is also something that I'm really passionate about, is moving the conversation forward into the habits and skills that you can learn and lifestyle changes that you can make that really promote health in that area. It would be like reading a book on heart disease or heart health, and the entirety of the book was, hey, it's okay to have heart disease. Millions of Americans do. You're not alone. There are medications that you can take, like statins and blood thinners, and there are hospitals if you have a heart attack. You're not alone, which is good. It's like, thank you for destigmatizing heart disease for me. But at some point in the book, can you please tell me how I can prevent a heart attack to begin with? Or if I have clogged arteries, how can I stop that damage or even reverse some of that damage to begin with? Or if I don't have any of that, but I have, a dad or grandpa who passed away from a heart attack, how can I have that genetic predisposition or that tendency towards that? How can I make some changes in my lifestyle to not struggle as much as they did, and so on and so forth. And so obviously hear me in saying that I do think there should be absolutely no stigma in getting help for mental illness, whether that's medical, psychiatric, pharmaceutical help for your mental illness. But I think that there's just also so much more to the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so good to kind of point out a little bit of that difference between mental health and mental illness, and how they all are kind of in this family together, but they can require different walks down and different ways to kind of go about them. But as we open up the conversation, who can be impacted by mental health struggles or mental illness struggles?
Who's not?
Yeah. And I'm like, the kind of question seems a little silly because it's everybody, but I think there is a little bit of this, I don't know what the word is, like fear or this myth that I could never, or I'm alone in my struggles and no one else feels this way. But I think there is so much health, like you said, in destigmatizing. Everybody can struggle with it, and there's such a wide range of that struggle in mental health and stuff like that. But are there any other myths that you commonly see in as you guys work through this that you're like, I wish people would just understand, like, this is not true? Like, you kind of want to shake them and be like, this is a myth. No.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's not funny, but one myth that I see often is many times people think that in order to start therapy, or you don't need to start therapy or seek out help or make changes in your life, big changes for your mental health, until you're at the end of your rope. That you really have to be deeply struggling, and then that's when you make some changes for your mental health. And I just want to say that it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to hit rock bottom before you start prioritizing your mental health. The healthiest married couples that I know, they go to marriage counseling and marriage conferences and retreats, and they go on date nights when they're in a good place in order to stay in that good place. The most fit people that I know, they don't wait until they've gained 300 pounds in order to get a gym membership. They make that a part of their everyday lifestyle, and as a result, they never struggle as deeply as they would had they not had those that prioritization of their physical health. And so I think it's the same with mental health. I'm a part of Celebrate Recovery at our Buckeye campus. It's an incredible resource that we have at Palm Valley Church. In addition to getting treatment for your mental health, it's an amazing community to join if you're struggling with your mental health. But so often some misconceptions I hear are that, one, it's only for people who struggle with drugs and alcohol. And obviously that's not the case. I personally do not struggle with that. But also people think that they have to get to the end of themselves before they'll walk into the doors of a place like Celebrate Recovery, which, I've been walking in health and victory over my struggles for years now, and I'm still there every single week, a part of that community. working my program and also helping others now work their program. And there are people there, men and women, who also are working their program for things like pride, codependency, people pleasing, perfectionism, anger, lust, pornography, control issues. So many things, so many hurts, habits, and hang-ups that left unchecked can fester and grow in your heart and become a mental health issue. And so that's just a really big myth that I want to bust, is who needs to focus on their mental health? When should you get help? And I would say probably sooner than you think.
Agreed. One myth that I like to point out is if you ask someone directly if they are thinking about committing suicide, that you will put the idea in their head. And I've encountered that. I even believed that as a college student, even early in my practice many years ago, when I would have a student sitting across from me and they were telling me things that sounded like they were thinking about committing suicide, I would become very nervous, like, oh, I have to ask them. And then if they say yes, what do I do? Over the years, it is now a standard practice. If a student is in my office and I'm talking to them, I will ask them directly, are you having thoughts of suicide or self-injury? And it is absolutely not something that puts the idea in their head. We have research to back that up. We know that when that question is asked directly, that it can be a relief to the person who's being asked. It lets the person being asked know that the person who is asking them is able to handle the conversation. And that is the opportunity for that person to talk about their feelings by being asked. And so that often is the road towards them getting the help that they need. And so asking if a person is thinking about committing suicide does not put the idea in their head if it wasn't there already, and it can lead to the help that they need.
Wow, I love that. I know in my own personal life, a big myth that people might have is that depression or anxiety or any other mental illness, it always presents itself the same on the outside. That it always looks like not being able to get out of bed, not being able to shower, changes in appetite or sleep patterns, crying all the time. And that's just not the case, at least in my own life. As an adult, when I have had seasons of deep depression, I have continued putting on makeup and getting dressed and going to work with a smile on my face and doing my job in a professional way, not crying all the time. And even as a teenager, struggling deeply, I continued getting straight A's, taking a full AP class load, working hard at my part-time job after school. On the outside, nobody would have ever thought that I was contemplating whether my life was even worth living. And so I love that you mentioned how important it is to really get to know a person's heart and also ask, instead of just assuming that they're okay because of how they look on the outside.
Yeah, I think that's huge, of knowing, like, even if you can struggle with anxiety and the person next to you can struggle with anxiety, it doesn't mean it looks the exact same. I think one thing that I always struggled with growing up, and one of my friends in high school was like the person like, oh, that's crazy, is I think a lot of people are like, well, I didn't go through that, so my anxiety or my fears aren't as big of a deal. And I think that stops people from seeking out help, because it's like, well, this person struggles with that. And so in high school, I had a friend who her niece was diagnosed with cancer. And so it was such this big thing, and everyone around her was always like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And I can't imagine going through that. And she'd always say, like, well, this is just my struggle, and your struggles are equally as important, even though we're not going through the same thing. And so that reminder of, I think we can compare a lot of, my struggle looks like this, but their struggle looks like that, so mine isn't worth asking for help in. And I think reminding ourselves, just because it looks different, our trauma and our pain can still be equally as great as in any situation that we're going through. And it doesn't need to be these different things. But as we're talking to parents, and a lot of the times it's the kids, it's their middle schoolers or high schoolers, even younger, that are struggling with their mental health. And I know you guys have worked a lot with youth. And so I would love to just share maybe some statistics about youth and mental health and what they walk through in those kind of numbers wise.
What we've seen is the state of mental health in youth has declined over recent years, over the last 10 years or so. The pandemic absolutely contributed to that, but the challenges that young people were having with depression, anxiety, thinking about suicide, self-injury, those things started well before that. And so we see that really adolescents and children are up against quite a bit, and families are in need of lots of resources and help. And so I know that when it comes to social media use, I know there's lots of research that's been done about when students or young people access social media, how that impacts them, because we have lots of years of it under our belt now, so we can look longitudinally or over a long period of time to see the impact of it. And we see that when people and adolescents are using social media for 3 or more hours a day, then that leads to them being 2 times more likely to develop clinical levels of anxiety and depression, in addition to lower self-esteem, symptoms of eating disorder, you name it. And so there are some real consequences to, one, the use of social media in particular, but also just to being an adolescent and a child in this day and age. There's quite a lot of things that they're having to contend with that they need help with.
That's crazy. I didn't know 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah, more than 3 hours. Mm-hmm.
Because that seems so small. Like
Mm-hmm.
3 hours a day, like seems like, oh, just 3 hours. But that's eye-opening for me, because I'm like, I spend more than probably 3 hours some days scrolling or doing all those different things. But that's it kind of goes into the next thing I wanted to ask you guys, of just the impact of social media on kids and on youth, because it's newer, but it's been around long enough to see the side effects, and they are real. And having conversations a lot with our students in our ministry, a lot of it has to do around social media. But I would just love to hear, like, why do you think that is? Why is this impact on social media so strong in our youth?
I feel like this could be a podcast episode in and of itself.
100% it could.
A few years ago, I watched a documentary called The Social Dilemma. I think it's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. And in it, these big tech giants who were a part of the teams that invented the iPad and some of these social media platforms were asked the question, does your child own one of these? Or would you ever allow your child to have an account on this platform? And they say, absolutely not. I would never. To which the journalist says, but why? You created it. Why wouldn't you give it to your kids? And soberly they say, because we know better now. We didn't know back then what we know now. And I am very deep in this tech industry. I run a digital marketing and web development firm. So working with Google queries, manipulating the spooky social media algorithms, writing code, working with AI, these are things that I do for my day job. And it's a part of so many of the people that I love, their lives as well. My husband runs the Palm Valley Church social media accounts and helps create the content for those. And my brother is actually in a really high position as a software developer at a big tech household name kind of Silicon Valley company. My parents are online entrepreneurs, so I am no stranger to seeing the benefits of social media and how it can be used redemptively, but I don't see social media as some kind of neutral tool that I'm using for good. I see it as a work hazard that I have to use with extreme caution to do my job. So often I hear parents saying things, or pastors, all kinds of people saying, social media is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's a tool, and it's all about the boundaries that you set, how much time you spend on it, who you follow. But if you're just using it for a short amount of time each week to keep up with your friends and family, that's all good. I disagree with that view as somebody in this industry, because where that argument falls short is in the ramifications and the consequences of using this tool. If I were to stare, people say, it's kind of like money. Money is neither good nor bad. It's just a tool that can be used for good or bad, or the love of money is what's bad. But if I stared at a dollar bill for an hour a day or 3 hours a day, or if I stared at a hammer, which is another tool, for an hour a day, that is not going to create a dopamine feedback loop that's going to cause an addiction like social media will. That's not going to change the chemical structure of my brain or deaden parts of my brain, as neuroscientists are saying actually appear on brain scans now. That's not going to prey on a human vulnerability that I have in my psyche as somebody made in the image of God who has this need to feel love and belonging in a social group and community. So I can go on and on and on of where that argument falls short, but I would just, I'll step off my soapbox and encourage parents, if you would like to continue on, start this conversation, start thinking about these things. A good book, next step reading, would be The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He is the author or co-author of the book The Coddling of the American Mind, which is a secondary recommendation. That's also a good book, especially if you have young adults or teenagers who are about to be launched into young adulthood. And I would just encourage you. I know that it is so hard because every single child in their class has one of these, is on these. They won't fit in. And I would say that statistically speaking, them using this the way that they do, in a few years, every single one of those kids may also be struggling with debilitating and crippling anxiety. So be the weird one. It's not too late to make some changes in your family's life. There is no wisdom in trying to fit into a society that is broken and sick. And yeah.
Can we just mic drop?
That was so good.
Yes.
So good.
This could be a whole. Let's do
No,
a second.
I'll bring you
podcast
back.
on
I'll bring you
social
guys back
media.
in the future for sure.
With some people from the tech industry who can.
Yeah, I think that's so. There's so much beauty in that because, there is truth, and social media can be used for good. Like, we use it as a church to promote all of the people that serve here, and we love on them, and we encourage people to come back, and there is that tool side of it. But I never thought about looking at it in the sense of that if I'm staring at it every single day, it creates this dopamine. And I've seen a little bit of that documentary on the Social Dilemma, which is a really good resource to watch too, to see kind of their perspective of it.
It is Netflix, so take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, this is true.
Chew the meat, eat out the bone, or what is it?
Chew the meat, spit out the bones.
There you go. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Eat the
all
cherries,
those fun
spit out the pits, all those good idioms.
Things. Is there anything you'd like to add, Selena?
Well, just perhaps going back to the myths. Maybe a myth is, it's just looking at a phone. It's just like it's not going to make that big of a difference. And if anyone is subscribing to that myth, there is plenty of evidence to show, like as Marisa in a very plain example explained, it is not inconsequential to be looking at a phone, looking at social media. She's talking about the dopamine feedback loop that we had in our brain. So we're getting hits of dopamine, and dopamine is a happy chemical and we get those hits of dopamine when we do something that we like to do, that we want to do again. And so we create a system in our brain that lets us know, ooh, this feels good, I want to keep doing this. And that feedback loop is what leads to addiction over time when that loop is overstimulated. And so I think you've put to bed another myth potentially about this being an inconsequential little activity that kids can do or use, for a certain amount of time.
And like you mentioned, we do have the longitudinal data now that shows the correlation between the rising suicide rates in youth and also the rising use of social media. And back in the 1940s, doctors and marketers were promoting cigarettes to pregnant women and to children, and this was a normal part of society. While studies were first coming out showing this correlation between cigarette smoking and lung cancer, lung disease, but correlation is not causation, so it got swept under the rug. But now we have the medical imaging that shows us what tobacco does to a person's lungs. And we're starting to have the medical imaging that shows what these technologies do to the organ that is our brain. I think social media is less like a tool, like a dollar bill or a hammer, and more like a cigarette. Tread with caution. We would never, decades later, we would never think of whether or not we should give our 10-year-old or a 15-year-old a cigarette, because we have the data now, we have the science now to, we know better. They didn't know better back then, and I think maybe in 20 years or so, we might have more of a clearer idea of the ramifications of this.
Yeah. I know, I'm like hearing these conversations, I'm like, yeah, we could go on for hours, because like so many things in my brain are popping up. Like we talk about the side effects of social media, but just technology in general and everything that we're allowing in. I think like what you allow in will come out. And I think back in seasons of my life where I've been watching shows that are things that are about like mythical creatures, or all these different shows that are very against what biblically is right. And I'm like, I notice that my mental health struggles when I'm watching something that isn't wrong, but it's not right. And so I think that that conversation is so large and so good to start and spark with our parents, because we do, a lot of times I look at social media and I just think, yeah, it can be good, it can be bad. I have that same mindset of it's okay. And then I think about, well, our phones are distractions. Our social media is a way to pull away from people, and you sit and you scroll, but the beauty that comes from releasing that, I think, is so huge in our kids and in our personal lives as well. Like we could keep going forever, but I want to continue on and move on in our conversation. But I know for me personally, growing up, when I struggled, I didn't share with my parents. And I'm sure it frustrated my mom to no end, because I would never want to talk about it. And I think a lot of our parents are probably sitting in that of, I can tell that my kid is struggling, but they won't talk to me. And so I would love to hear just what advice you could give to a parent that is in that season. How do they approach their kids? How can they start this conversation? How can they notice signs in their kids that are almost a cry for help, even if their kid doesn't know it yet?
Right. It's so hard because I feel like kids, especially teenagers in particular, if you ask them, how was school today? How was your day? What did you learn at church today? Any number of questions, they'll say, I don't know, fine, or like some kind of grunt. And that can be hard to get information out of them. But if you're a parent or if you've worked with kids, you've probably had the experience where it's when you're sitting side by side with them doing something that they love, whether you're at the kitchen table making rainbow loom bracelets with them, or you're shooting hoops and you're on the drive home, all of a sudden they're telling you about Minecraft and their school and their teacher and the kid who's been bullying them, and that's the reason they no longer like going to school. And now you're getting into the good stuff, but it just took a lot of this doing life together, doing life side by side, being present. And so often they're kind of like clamshells, where if you try to use your fingers, white knuckle grip, trying to open them up and ask questions, they're not going to open up. But if, like a clam, if you just kind of stay around them, doing things with them, doing life together, there will be those moments where they open up and show you that pearl inside, and you never know when those pearl moments are going to happen. And, before you know it, they'll shut back up. And so I would just encourage you with the kids and teenagers in your life to be present in their life, to be available, especially if they're kids of your own, to unbusy and unhurry your life, add some margin so that you can be present for those pearl moments. Even though as kids get older, they may need you physically less and less. They need you to do things for them less and less. Especially with teenagers, they need you more than ever, actually. And so that is my encouragement.
Mm-hmm. You touched on so many great things that I also wanted to share. When I'm working with students, I find that not insisting on making eye contact with them while I'm talking to them helps quite a bit. Students will naturally look away when they're talking about things that are close to their heart or something that's challenging for them. Mm-hmm. And so I will turn my chair away so that I'm not facing them. And I have found that they just continue to talk and talk very freely when we aren't face to face. And so that goes back to the magic of the car ride home. Yeah. You're not facing each other, and they're able to share things more readily. Allowing students to, or children, adolescents to be in their environment that they're comfortable with, as Marisa had mentioned, something that they enjoy doing, joining into that space with them. You get acclimated to their space, and then they're able to open up that way. I think also something important is to let there be awkward silence with your children and adolescents. If you're in a conversation or you do ask a question and they're not answering right away, allow them time to process, think it through, and give a response. I have found that my practice has been enriched by the times when I was just quiet. I was just a set of ears and not a mouth. And that is a way to build trust with your adolescent and child, is to know that they can speak and be listened to. And that they're not having to be rushed through sharing what's on their mind and on their hearts.
I love that. That's so funny. I never thought of that, making eye contact. I do that. I think I look away when I'm sharing vulnerably.
Yeah. I noticed that in myself too. I'm like, I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to look right now. I love that clam illustration and being present. And I think that it's something that I want to touch on later on in our podcast on a different episode. But there's this thing that we always go back to. My husband, Zach, loves to say it: high relation, high value, or high relation, high boundaries with parents. And that when you have that high relationship with your kids, you can have those high boundaries and those go together. But it requires being present with your kids and being in their zone, playing the games that they like, being around them in what they enjoy. And that is what helps bring this like solid relationship with your kid. Because I think so much when the moments I think about with my mom that I love are when we go shopping together. And I find myself wanting to share so much because I like shopping and my mom likes shopping. So we get to do something together versus when I was younger and I was sitting on the table and she tried to talk to me about my day. I'm like, I don't really want to talk right now. And finding those moments, I think, is so huge. And something else that I will plug every single time that I can is that's why we have kids ministries and student ministries, is because one thing that is so important for a kid's growth is an adult that loves them and cares for them that's not their parent. And that is such a needed relationship for especially a middle school and a high school student, but even our kids. And that's why we have mentors in our student ministries, is because it's somebody else that's a little bit less scary than their parent to talk to sometimes. I can start that conversation. I've had students come up and share things with me, and one of my first responses is always, have you talked to your parents? Are you going to share this with your parents? Like, let me give you advice, but I'm always going to push you back to your parent because you need to have that relationship. And that's why I'm like, don't have your kids sitting in with you in adult service. Get them into their rooms, because these relationships are so important to help build that gap and to help those conversations flow. Because when I was younger, struggling to share with my parents, I was sharing with my mentors and I was telling them, and that mentor had a relationship with my parents. So it helped bridge that gap, and having that relationship is so important. It's one of the resources we provide as a church for your families. And I just love plugging that anytime I can, is get them in their rooms.
Or even in kids, I feel like when they're sitting at their table or at their rug with their leader and they're having connect group, oftentimes the best conversations actually happen before service starts or after service, when they're just coloring together at the table. That's when they're really opening up. And so I always hear the phrase, it takes a village. So let these youth mentors and volunteers be a part of your village.
Yeah. I love that.
I would like to add on, JC, that what you described is a protective factor for children and adolescents, is having at least one adult in their life that they can talk to. Having that one adult that they can trust and that they can be open with is a protective factor. And so sometimes, unfortunately, some children, adolescents don't identify anyone in their home life as being that one adult. And so if that one adult can be someone at church or someone at school, then that is going to be a protective factor for them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. I would love to hear I know you referenced some books as well, but what other resources are available for parents as they start to walk down this journey with their kids in their mental health to help them parent?
First and foremost, the local church absolutely is a resource. The people who are running our children's ministry are passionate and knowledgeable about children, child development, adolescence. And so going to one of those leaders, I think, or staff members would be a first good step. Next is the local schools. I know in the public schools here in the Valley, all schools have a school psychologist, at least one school psychologist, or the district has several different school psychologists that parents can have access to. And so school psychologists and school counselors are knowledgeable about mental health resources that are specific to a particular community. As a school psychologist, I can say I love answering questions from parents about what agency can I pursue? What do you recommend as next steps for my child? And so those school personnel, counselors, and school psychologists can absolutely be used as a resource for identifying appropriate next steps for kids and adolescents.
Absolutely. And if you are seeking help for yourself as the parent and are looking for recommendations, head to palmvalley.org/care. There are amazing resources there, recommended Christian therapists, licensed counselors, books, hotlines, websites, so many resources there at palmvalley.org/care. And I also want to plug again the Celebrate Recovery Ministry that meets every Monday night at the Goodyear campus at 6:30 p.m. and also every week at the Buckeye campus at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday nights. It's an amazing community that's available to you here at our local church, and so I just want to encourage parents to head to those two resources.
Yeah, I think using the resources of the people around you, finding those books, Celebrate Recovery for our parents that are over 18 or their kids that are young adults that are over 18 are such good, amazing resources. I love talking about CR and debunking the fact that you have to be addicted to a substance to go to CR, but it's for everybody. And it's such a beautiful resource that we have for all scopes of struggles in your life. And as we talk about mental health with our kids and the kids that our parents are leading, there's a side of the conversation that I think parents forget about, and it's themselves. And it's caring for themselves, because it is so important for the parents to be pouring into themselves and leading themselves well and focusing on their hearts so that way they can lead their parents well. And I would just love to hear, why is it so important for a parent to care about their own mental health before they lead into their kids?
Right. I think if you choose to get healthy, there is a positive ripple effect that can affect generations beyond you. If you learn healthy coping skills, emotional regulation, and you model this, because so often we hear with kids more is caught rather than taught, you have no idea what kind of impact and that might give to your child, tools that they'll need as they're adults. If you choose to no longer, either stuff or numb your emotions with alcohol or food or screens, or on the flip side of that, lash out in your emotions with big reactions, but instead choose to develop these healthy coping mechanisms and work on your mental health, there can be a generational positive impact that goes beyond you. It's so important. So often I hear parents, specifically mothers, I hear say, I just feel really selfish taking time to myself. I feel guilty taking time away from my kids. When really, oftentimes the most loving thing that you can do for your child is to take that time to do the things for your mental and physical health that will make you healthy as a parent. That's one of the most loving things that you can do for your child. So I just want to encourage parents in that.
Like what we're told when we get on an airplane, if we have someone with us that we would need to help in the instance of an emergency, we need to put our oxygen mask on first prior to putting theirs on. And we all understand that, and that makes sense. And the same applies to our day-to-day lives.
So true.
And so we cannot give what we don't have. And so as the adults, as adults who care for children, we need to make sure that we have the tools that we need and we are filled up so that we can then be poured out on the ones that we love. And so many times I have heard my students say, they don't want to tell their parents about how they're feeling because they either don't want to get yelled at, are afraid that the parent is going to be upset with them, or they feel that their parent is already too stressed out. They don't want to stress them out more. In fact, that third response is what I hear most often is, my parent already has so much stress, I don't want to add this stress to them. And this is coming up in conversations where they've disclosed to me that they are having thoughts of suicide or are engaging in self-harm behaviors. And I know that I am going to be calling the parent to inform the parent as soon as I'm done talking to the student. But I want to get a sense from the student about what, if they have talked to their parents, and if not, why. And that is one of the top answers is, well, they're so stressed out, I don't want to stress them out more. And I know that the parent absolutely wants to know exactly what is on the child's mind and how they're feeling 100% of the time. And so I think when it comes to taking care of the children, adolescents in our lives, making sure that we are regulated, we are self-regulated so that we are able to have control over our emotions, our responses is very important, because that will build a relationship with the children, adolescents in the lives of adults, and can help make the adults seem like a safe person to go to open up. And so I think for adults, taking control of their emotions and learning how to regulate themselves when interacting with the children and adolescents in their lives is very important, so that the children and adolescents can know that they are going to an adult who will have a consistent response and will have a safe response, and therefore can then be a safe person for them to open up to.
So good.
Yeah, I love that. I think hitting on that is so important, and I think we talked about it in our couple episodes back, where we talked about it's so easy to focus on the kids, and it's so easy to get wrapped up in driving your kids places or making sure that they're doing okay, that you forget about yourself. And we talked about, in that situation, you forget about your marriage and how you need to put that first. And I think I love that statement. More often it is caught than taught, and I think needing to be reminded that we are the example, and we want to coach our kids and share with them these things. But I think so often our kids are learning, and I know I learned more from what I just observed rather than what I was told, because you do that more often, just the natural day-to-day life, than those teaching moments that you get. I think a lot of the struggles where kids, they share and they hit this opposition with their parents, because I think there can be this emotion for parents that if my kid is struggling, then that means I'm a failure. And they take on this weight, and so they don't want to admit that their kids are in a hard place, because that means they have to admit that they're a bad parent or anything like that, which is so far from the truth. And I would just love to hear some wisdom on that statement of when a kid comes to you, how do you understand that it doesn't mean that you're a bad parent?
I think it can be helpful for a parent to take on the mindset that they are an advocate for their child, and that they can help their child with problem solving. And so that difficulties with mental health, emotional health, behavioral health, those are things that the child is experiencing. The child lives in a very different world than the parents lived in when they were young. And so understanding that their child is encountering things that they maybe have never encountered before at that developmental age. And so seeing themselves as an advocate and as a helper, as a problem, someone who can join their child in problem solving. So that way the solution to the child's difficulty now becomes outside of the parent, as okay, let's work together to find out what it is that you need, who can we go to for help, what experts can we go to get you the help that you need.
And just understanding that your child's struggle is not a reflection of you as a parent, trying your best to work through that, identifying that as a lie so that you don't have to take that personally and have a big reaction, because then, I can't believe you're struggling. What did I do wrong? Then it becomes the child needing to comfort you in their time of need. And so being able to work through that with the Lord so that it doesn't seep into or prevent you being able to be that listening ear for your child, that safe, like Selena said, regulated adult who can get the help for their child, and your child doesn't have to worry about stressing you out more or making you feel like a failure.
Thank you for being here. I'm so excited. Definitely probably will have to have you back in the future as we continue, because mental health is such a serious topic that we get to talk about, and I would love to continue the conversation, not just stop here. And as at home, as parents listen to this, I hope this opens up conversations for you and your kids to have, because it needs to be talked about. And shying away from these conversations don't prevent mental health struggles. They just keep them quiet. And so thank you so much for listening to us today. Again, if you have any topics you want us to talk about, anything you would love to hear from, you can always email those to familylife@palmvalley.org. Drop them in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. But we are so thankful for you. We hope you have a fantastic day, and we will see you on our next episode.